18 months ago, under the harsh sunlight of a cold Atlanta fertility clinic parking lot, the man I loved looked me dead in the eye and coldly demanded his engagement ring back. Just minutes earlier, the doctor had declared that I was permanently infertile. To make matters worse, his mother, a self-proclaimed devout Southern lady, smirked as she tossed my luggage onto the sidewalk like trash right in front of the neighbors, calling me a barren hen and a useless tree that could never bear fruit. Fast forward to today. I am standing outside Atlanta's premier historic estate, where his $1 million lavish wedding is currently taking place. When I push open those heavy double oak doors and roll in a custom designer double stroller with his triplet sons, I can guarantee you that the champagne glass in the groom's hand is going to shatter into 1,000,000 pieces. Before I show you how a so-called abandoned, infertile woman completely dismantled a hypocritical political empire, drop a comment below and let me know where you are watching from today. And if you believe that karma is best served wearing a custom-tailored emerald green suit, hit that like button and subscribe. My name is Kiana, and I am 32 years old. I work as a commercial real estate developer, though nobody inside this luxury estate knows that yet. In their eyes, I am still that same heartbroken, broke girl they threw out onto the street 18 months ago like yesterday's garbage. The early summer Atlanta breeze is warm and humid, carrying the rich scent of French catering mixed with sweet southern magnolias blooming around the property. I stand on the grand front porch of this massive mansion, complete with towering white Greek columns and a wide driveway packed with Porsches, Maybachs, and Range Rovers belonging to the city's political and business elite. I adjust the custom silk baby wrap across my chest, where my youngest son is fast asleep. In the sleek black double stroller in front of me, his two older brothers look around with big, curious eyes. All three of them are wearing tiny custom suits with matching gold silk boaties. They are practically miniature carbon copies of the man waiting behind those doors. Through the thick oak doors, I can hear a live jazz band playing softly inside the grand ballroom, accompanied by the crisp clinking of crystal glasses and the low hum of high society networking. This is not just a wedding for Isaiah and Vanessa. It is a carefully calculated corporate and political merger. Isaiah is 35 and running for a seat on the Atlanta City Council. He desperately needs Vanessa's family fortune and the clean, traditional image of a perfect American family to secure votes. Vanessa's father owns a massive chain of private medical clinics across the state, and Isaiah needs those deep pockets to fund his political campaign. I know exactly what is happening behind those doors right now. I can practically picture Isaiah standing on stage with a microphone in hand, selling a completely fabricated story about family values and civic legacy to a room full of wealthy donors. I place both hands flat against the smooth oak of the grand entrance. My heart is not racing from grief or panic. It is beating with the steady, rhythmic pulse of absolute power. For the past 18 months, I worked 18 hours a day. I kept my triplet pregnancy completely hidden, navigated the brutal world of commercial real estate, flipped properties, and built my own business empire from the ground up, all while facing the terrifying reality of carrying a high-risk pregnancy on my own. When I was at my most vulnerable and helpless, they tried to break me. They cast me out into the cold winter night, simply because I did not fit into their fake vote-winning image. Now I am back, and I am bringing an unstoppable storm right into the middle of their pristine, luxurious living room. With one firm push, the heavy oak doors groan loudly and swing wide open, revealing the grand spectacle inside. Golden light pours from 3 massive crystal chandeliers hanging from the vaulted ceiling. Hundreds of guests sit at round tables covered in crisp white linen, decorated with towering floral centerpieces of white roses and expensive orchids. Isaiah's campaign banners are subtly woven into the elegant wedding decor. because a politician like Isaiah never misses an opportunity to turn a personal milestone into a fundraising event. Right in the center of the room on a raised white stage stands Isaiah. He is dressed in a sharp tuxedo, holding a crystal champagne flute in one hand and a microphone in the other. Vanessa stands next to him like an expensive porcelain doll, wearing a custom wedding dress that probably costs more than my first car. She wears that hollow, practiced smile that belongs only to privileged people who have never worked a hard day in their lives. The squeak of my stroller wheels rolling over the marble threshold sounds shockingly loud in the room. The jazz band playing in the corner notices me first. The saxophonist stumbles and misses a note, and within seconds the music dies down completely. A sudden, deafening silence falls over the massive ballroom. Heads begin to turn one by one, starting from the back tables near the entrance and spreading forward like a wave. I push the stroller slowly and steadily down the center aisle. My emerald green suit demands attention, creating a striking contrast against the soft pinks and pure whites of the wedding setup. My high heels tap with a deliberate rhythm against the polished marble floor. I stand perfectly straight with my chin held high, ignoring the whispering political donors and the murmuring church elders. My eyes remain locked squarely on Isaiah. It takes him 5 full seconds to realize who just interrupted his flawless campaign speech. I watch as that arrogant smile melts off his face like hot wax. His eyes stretch wide in pure horror as his gaze moves from my face down to the baby wrapped against my chest, and then straight to the 2 little boys sitting in the double stroller. The expensive champagne flute slips right out of his frozen fingers. It shatters against the hardwood stage with a sharp crash, breaking into dozens of sparkling shards. Golden champagne pools around his custom leather shoes, but he does not even look down. He just stares at me as if all the oxygen has been sucked out of the room. Vanessa frowns in confusion, looking at her new husband before following his terrified gaze right to me. A massive wave of whispers ripples through the crowd. Wealthy Atlanta socialites lean in close to one another, covering their mouths as they whisper frantically. Quite a few people in this room recognize me. Some of them know me as the ex-fiancé, who mysteriously vanished 18 months ago. And now, here I am, pushing a small army of toddlers right down the center aisle of this $1 million wedding. The tension in the air is thick enough to choke on, but I maintain my calm, steady pace toward the front of the room. Suddenly, a figure bursts out from the front VIP table. It is Brenda, Isaiah's mother. She is wearing an overly dramatic silver southern hat and a dress covered in unnecessary sequins. Right now, her face is twisted with extreme panic and deep-seated rage. She marches toward me aggressively, with heavy, hurried steps. Brenda always hated me. She hated that I did not come from money, that I lacked a prestigious family name, and that I dared to expect equal respect from her son. 18 months ago, when the clinic produced that false infertility report, she was the loudest voice demanding that I be cast aside. She cuts me off halfway to the stage, using her body to block my path. She leans in close, keeping her voice low so the major donors nearby cannot hear her hysteria. As she gets close, a sharp wave of cheap perfume hits me. "What are you doing here, you useless woman?" she hisses like a snake, her eyes darting nervously back to her son, who is still standing on stage like a frozen statue. "How dare you show up to a sacred family occasion? Do you honestly think you can pick up some random street kids and waltz in here to ruin my son's perfect day? Get out right now, or I will have security throw you out on the street like the trash you are." She is shaking with anger, her hands clenched tight at her sides. She expects me to shrink back. She wants me to burst into tears and run away, just like I did 18 months ago when she threw my personal belongings onto the pavement. She is relying on the old power dynamic between us, thinking she is still the grand matriarch lecturing an inferior girl. I stop pushing the stroller. I stand there silently, letting her venomous words hang in the quiet air. Now the entire ballroom is watching us, waiting for my reaction. I look at Brenda, taking in the cold sweat forming on her forehead. Porch. I do not feel a single drop of fear or heartbreak. All I feel is a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that the trap has been set perfectly and they have walked right into it. I do not raise my voice. I do not need to shout to strip away whatever dignity she has left. I reach out a calm, steady hand and gently adjust the small gold silk bow tie on my son's chest in the stroller. Porch. He looks up at me with bright, beautiful eyes that feature a very distinct shade of amber brown, exactly like the man cowering on stage. Useless, I ask softly, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room. That is ironic, Brenda. Maybe you should take a closer look at these 3 exact replicas of your son. Porch. Her sharp gasp echoes through the hall, and the sound sends an involuntary chill down my spine. It is the exact same tone and malice she used 18 months ago. The sound of Brenda stumbling backward away from the stroller acts like a time machine, ripping me out of the glittering wedding reception and slamming me back into that icy, sterile medical exam room. Porch. 18 months ago, the air smelled of rubbing alcohol and bleached paper. I sat on the edge of a stiff medical chair, clutching a crumpled tissue. Isaiah sat in the corner, scrolling through emails on his phone, as if we were waiting for a routine dental cleaning instead of the results of our fertility evaluation. We had been trying to conceive for a year before getting engaged. Porch. Isaiah had insisted on it, claiming that a young, vibrant family was the ultimate political asset for his upcoming city council run. The doctor walked in holding a manila folder. I still remember the suffocating silence as she sat down, looking at me with clinical pity. Porch. She explained the test results, hormone levels, and reproductive abnormalities in soft, measured terms, but all I heard was the crushing final conclusion. I was completely infertile. The statistical probability of me conceiving naturally was 0. The world collapsed beneath my feet. A heavy weight pressed onto my chest, making it impossible to breathe. Porch. I turned to Isaiah, desperately needing him to take my hand and tell me we would get through it together. Instead, the man I was supposed to marry slowly put his phone away. There was no sympathy in his eyes, only cold, calculating disappointment. He looked at me the way a Wall Street trader looks at a failed investment. Porch. He stood up, politely thanked the doctor, and walked out of the room without waiting for me. I stumbled after him, tears blurring my vision as we walked through the waiting area and out into the blistering Atlanta heat. The asphalt radiated heat, but I felt frozen. Standing by his luxury sedan, I reached for his arm, begging him to talk to me. Porch. Isaiah turned around in the parking lot, his eyes completely hollow. The love was gone, replaced by raw ambition. He checked around to make sure no voters or reporters were watching, then said the words that tore my soul apart. I cannot marry you, Kiana, he said, his voice flat and controlled. A politician needs a family. Voters need to see a legacy. Porch. I am running on family values and community building, and I cannot do that with a woman who cannot give me children. You are a dead end. I stood there paralyzed by his cruelty. I asked him if our relationship meant nothing to him, if I was just a prop for his campaign. He did not answer. Instead, he held out his hand, palm up, staring pointedly at my ring finger. Porch. I need the ring back, he demanded right there in the parking lot, while I was still sobbing from the diagnosis. It is a family heirloom, and it belongs on the finger of a woman who can actually carry on the family bloodline. My hands shook so hard I could barely slide the diamond off. The ring felt heavy and cold as I dropped it into his hand. Porch. Without another word, he got into his car and drove away, leaving me alone in the summer heat to find my own way home. The nightmare did not end there. When I finally took an Uber back to our rental house, I found Brenda standing on the front porch. She had not even waited for me to walk up the steps. She had already stuffed my belongings into cheap black trash bags and dumped them onto the lawn. Porch. Her face was twisted with self-righteous disgust. Isaiah called me, she shouted from the porch, making sure the neighbors could hear. I told him from day one that you were not good enough for him. You come from nothing, and you are worth nothing. You are just a dry, useless tree, taking up space in my son's life. Take your trash and get off my property before I call the police for trespassing. Porch. I knelt on the grass, crying quietly as I shoved my clothes back into the torn plastic bags. I had never felt so small, so worthless, or so completely discarded. In less than 6 hours, they had stripped away my dignity, my future, and my self-worth. The sudden outburst of loud murmurs from the wedding guests snaps me right back to reality. Porch. The cold memory of that driveway fades away, replaced by the warm glow of crystal chandeliers. I am no longer that heartbroken girl crying on the lawn. I am standing in a custom emerald suit in the middle of the most exclusive venue in the city, holding total power over everyone in the room. Brenda stares at the children in the stroller, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Porch. The biological resemblance is undeniable. All 3 boys share Isaiah's jawline, his exact eye shape, and the distinct dimple on his left cheek. The undeniable proof of his fatherhood is sitting right in front of her, dressed in matching silk bowdies. As the shock wears off, Isaiah's survival instincts as a politician kick in. From the stage, I hear heavy, rushed footsteps. Porch. Isaiah comes charging down the steps, leaving his pale, trembling bride stranded at the altar. His face is a mask of desperation and rage. He is losing control of his political narrative, and to a man who built his entire life on public image, losing the narrative is a fate worse than death. He storms down the center aisle, waving his hands frantically toward the back of the room. Security! Porch, he roars, his voice cutting over the whispers of wealthy donors. Where is security? Get this woman out of here immediately! 4 burly men in dark suits start moving through the crowd, but as they approach the aisle, they hesitate. You cannot aggressively lay hands on a mother holding babies in a high-end American venue, surrounded by hundreds of prominent guests holding smartphones. Porch. That kind of footage leaking out would be an absolute public relations nightmare. Isaiah reaches the aisle and stops a few feet away from me. He places his body between me and the stage, attempting to physically block Vanessa and her wealthy parents from the confrontation. Porch. Puffing out his chest to project dominance, he seamlessly switches into his campaign persona, raising his voice so every major donor and church elder can hear his defense. I am so sorry, everyone, he announces loudly, putting on a fake expression of sympathy. This is a very unfortunate situation. This woman is a mentally unstable ex-girlfriend from years ago. Porch. She has been stalking and harassing me ever since we broke up. Because she could not accept that I moved on and found true love with my beautiful wife, Vanessa. She completely lost her mind, he continues, turning to make eye contact with his largest financial backers. He places a hand over his heart, shaking his head in fake grief. Porch. I never wanted to discuss my private struggles in public, but she has clearly lost touch with reality. She hired actors or picked up random kids off the street to show up at my wedding and extort me. She thinks she can use fake children to threaten a respectable black man's political career and shake me down for campaign funds. Shocked gasps fill the room. Porch. Older church members shake their heads, whispering about how tragic it is to see a woman fall so low. At the main VIP table, Vanessa's parents glare at me with utter contempt. Isaiah plays the victim role flawlessly, wrapping his lies in political persecution and righteous anger. He is betting everything on his ability to charm the room and paint me as an unstable, money-hungry liar. Porch. He steps closer to me, dropping his polite public tone and gritting his teeth as he whispers. I do not know where you got these kids, Kiana, but you will regret stepping foot in here. You better turn around and leave right now, or I will ruin whatever sad excuse for a life you have left. You are nothing, and you have always been nothing. I do not flinch. I do not raise my voice to match his lies. Porch. When a man is desperately trying to build a house of cards in the middle of a hurricane, you do not need to argue with him. I just watch him sweat. I watch the pulse jumping in his neck, seeing the raw terror hidden behind his arrogant threats. Slowly and deliberately, I reach into my designer handbag. Orch. The security guards take a cautious step forward, but all I pull out is a thick, sealed, manila envelope. I hold it up so the bright chandelier light shines on the official federal seal stamped on the front. I offer him a cold smile that makes Isaiah instinctively take a step back. Orch. I knew your political PR training would kick in right away, Isaiah, I say, my voice carrying a quiet, lethal authority that cuts through the whispers. You were always so good at making up stories on the spot. Luckily, I brought some reading material to set the record straight. I step past Isaiah, completely ignoring his attempt to block me. Orch. He reaches out to grab my arm, but I hit him with a look of pure promises of ruin, and he instinctively pulls his hand back. I walk straight up to the VIP table. This is not just any table. It is the absolute center of power in the room, where the mayor of Atlanta, the police chief, and top real estate developers are seated alongside Vanessa's billionaire parents. Orch. I tear open the thick envelope and pull out 3 detailed documents. I do not give them to Isaiah. I slam them right onto the middle of the VIP table, right beside the towering white orchids. The heavy thud of the paperwork hitting the glass table echoes through the silent ballroom. These are court-certified, federally approved DNA paternity results, I announce clearly and steadily. Orch. Performed by an independent lab. You can see the methodology, chain of custody, and final conclusions on the last page of each file. The probability of paternal relationship for all 3 boys is 99.9%. The mayor, sitting closest to the documents, slowly reaches into his jacket for his reading glasses. Orch. Vanessa's father leans forward, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple as he reads the bold black print at the top of the page. The room erupts into chaotic noise. The pristine political image Isaiah spent 18 months building is shattering right before his donor's eyes. Just then, Vanessa finally snaps out of her shock. The delicate, blushing bride act vanishes instantly. Orch. She gathers up the heavy train of her custom silk gown and practically tumbles down the stage steps, her high heels catching on the fabric. She shoves past Isaiah and rushes to the VIP table, gasping for air, her face distorted with hysteria. "This is a lie," she screams, her voice screeching through the microphone. Isaiah dropped on stage earlier. Orch. She grabs the certified papers, her manicured nails trembling violently. "You desperate gold digger! You forged these because he chose me. A woman with actual class and family lineage." She begins ripping the thick documents apart, shredding them over and over as her chest heaves, letting the torn paper fall like snow onto the polished marble floor. Orch. She looks around at the political donors and church elders, desperately begging for support. "Do not listen to her," Vanessa pleads, her voice cracking with desperation. "She is a liar. She is trying to extort us because my family has money and she has nothing. She probably paid a shady online doctor to print these fake papers. Isaiah told me all about her. She is unstable and she is lying." Orch. As if Vanessa's outburst is a cue, the rest of the toxic family jumps into action. Isaiah's aunts, Shirley and Beatrice, stand up from the front table. They have always treated Isaiah like an infallible king while treating me like dirt. Every Sunday family dinner in the past was filled with passive-aggressive comments about my hair, my clothes, and my career. Orch. Now they start shouting at the crowd, pointing their manicured fingers directly at me. "Have you no shame coming in here trying to trap a successful black man?" Aunt Shirley yells, waving her arms. "We all know what you are. You saw him succeeding and you decided to drag your baggage in here to bring him down." Aunt Beatrice nods frantically beside her, her large hat shaking. "That is right, Orch. You are just jealous that he upgraded to a woman of substance. You cannot trap a man of God with fake documents and a stroller full of fatherless kids. Take your scam and get out before God strikes you down for lying in a house of holy matrimony." The sheer hypocrisy of their words washes over me, but I do not feel anger, only a cold, deep satisfaction. Orch. They are exposing their true colors to the entire room, blindly defending a man who lied to all of them. I stand there watching the torn DNA reports fall to the floor. I do not need to defend myself. I anticipated this exact reaction. I knew they would try to discredit the paperwork and call me crazy. Suddenly, a figure steps out from the line of bridesmaids near the stage. It is Heather. She is wearing an unflattering soft pink bridesmaid dress, clearly chosen by Vanessa to make her look dull. But the expression on Heather's face is anything but dull. Heather is a sharp, intelligent woman who married Isaiah's younger brother, Malik, 5 years ago. From her first day in the family, she endured the same toxic mind games from Brenda and the aunts. But unlike everyone else in this family, Heather saw right through Isaiah's golden boy facade. Malik tries to grab her arm to pull her back, telling her to stay out of it. But Heather yanks her arm away with absolute disgust. She walks down the stage steps with total confidence, her eyes showing complete exhaustion with the family's endless lies. The ballroom falls silent once again as she walks directly toward me. She stops at the main VIP table, slowly kneels down, and picks up a torn piece of the DNA report bearing the lab's official seal. She stands up and turns to face Vanessa and the furious aunts. "These documents are not fake," Heather says, her voice calm and sharp, cutting right through the tension. "They are 100% real." The entire room gasps. Brenda chokes back a gasp across the room. Isaiah looks like he is about to be physically sick. "What nonsense are you talking about, you foolish woman?" Vanessa screams, stepping toward Heather. "You do not know anything." "I know everything." Heather fires back without backing down. "Because I am the one who sent her the DNA samples." 3 months ago, when Isaiah stayed at my house during a campaign tour, I walked into the guest bathroom and pulled hair straight from his custom monogrammed hairbrush. I sealed it in an evidence bag and sent it overnight directly to Kiana's legal team for testing. Heather turns and looks straight at Isaiah, who is dripping with sweat under the chandeliers. "I kept the tracking number, Isaiah." "I kept all the receipts. I even saved the hallway security footage showing me walking out of your bathroom with that brush. Legally, you have 3 biological sons, and the only fraud in this room is the man wearing that tuxedo." Aunt Shirley opens her mouth, but no sound comes out. The political donors at the VIP table are openly whispering now, their expressions shifting from shock to pure disapproval. The police chief leans back, crossing his arms and shaking his head. Church elders avert their eyes from Isaiah, disgusted by the scandal. Heather is not finished. She turns to the crowd, her voice rising with years of built-up frustration against a family that tried to break her spirit just like they tried to break mine. The exact same day, doctors told Kiana she was infertile. They threw her out like trash within hours. They did not even wait 24 hours. They discarded her simply because she did not fit into Isaiah's fake political script. But she was already carrying his children, all 3 of them. While he stands here spending Vanessa's father's money to buy a city council seat and pretend to be a righteous man, Kiana has been raising his sons entirely on her own. The truth hits the room like a physical shockwave. Vanessa stumbles backward and collapses into a chair at the VIP table, covering her face as reality crushes her. Her father stands up, his face dark with rage, glaring at Isaiah with pure hatred. The merger is crumbling in real time. The perfect political image is destroyed. Isaiah completely loses it. His charming, educated politician persona is ripped away, revealing the desperate, cruel man underneath. His face turns a deep, blotchy purple, veins bulging on his neck as he loses every last shred of restraint. "Shut up!" he roars, pointing a trembling finger at Heather. "Both of you shut up! This is a setup! An organized attack to ruin my life!" He turns his wild, enraged eyes onto me, lunging forward like a cornered animal realizing the trap has closed around him. My stance remains rigid and unyielding. I do not flinch or back away. "You think you can just walk in here and ruin my life?" he screams, spit flying from his lips. I do not care what those papers say. Even if those kids are mine, you will never get a single dime from me. I will bankrupt you in court. I will bury you in legal fees until you are living in a box on the street. Porch. He turned sharply, looking wildly at the security guards who were still hesitating near the outer edge of the room. Do your job, he screamed, his voice cracking with pure hysteria. I want her arrested for trespassing. This is private property. This estate belongs to my wife's family. Security, get this garbage off my wife's property right now. Porch. 4 burly guards in dark suits stepped forward together, their heavy footsteps echoing off the polished marble floor. They were large, intimidating men with tactical earpieces fitted discreetly into their ears. Isaiah stood at the edge of the stage, a triumphant, almost manic smile spreading across his face. For one split second, he genuinely believed he had regained control of the room. Porch. He puffed out his chest and glared down at me, as if the presence of hired muscle would magically force me to shrink back and turn into the frightened, crying girl he dumped in a parking lot 18 months ago. He expected me to panic. He expected me to stumble backward, grab the stroller, and run out those heavy oak doors in absolute humiliation under the mocking gazes of Atlanta high society. Porch. I did not move an inch. I stood my ground, my hands resting lightly on the handles of the luxury double stroller. The babies were completely undisturbed by the rising tension in the room, with my youngest still resting peacefully against my chest, inside the custom silk wrap. I looked the security director dead in the eye as he closed the distance between us. Porch. I did not raise my voice, and I did not show a single trace of fear. I simply raised one hand, palm outward, making a silent, effortless, yet completely commanding motion to stop. At that exact second, the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom swung open once again. The loud thud made several guests in the back row jump right out of their seats. Porch. A tall, imposing man stepped over the threshold. He wore an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, carried a heavy leather briefcase, and pushed his glasses up his nose with the cool, practiced efficiency of a man who dismantles corporations for a living. This was Mr. Elias. Porch. My chief corporate attorney, and the master architect behind the financial guillotine I was about to drop on this absurd gathering. He marched down the center aisle, completely ignoring the stunned looks of political donors and the frantic whispers of church elders. He did not look at Isaiah, and he did not look at Vanessa. Porch. He walked straight to the front of the security team and handed a single sheet of paper to the lead guard. The security director frowned, taking the paper in confusion. He read the bold print at the top of the page, and his eyes stretched wide in pure shock. He looked from the paper to Mr. Elias, and then turned his gaze toward me with absolute respect. Porch. He immediately stepped back, lowered his hands, and signaled to the other 3 guards to stand down. They crossed their hands in front of them, forming a protective barrier, not to protect Isaiah, but to protect me. Isaiah looked like he was about to have a medical emergency. The vein in his forehead pulsed violently as he watched his orders get completely ignored. Porch. He gripped the edge of the stage so hard his knuckles turned white. What are you doing? He screamed, his voice breaking in panic. I am paying you to secure this venue. Grab her and throw her out onto the street. I want her off my wife's family estate right now. Do your job, or I will have every single one of you fired and blacklisted from every event management company in Atlanta. Porch. The lead guard did not even blink. He looked up at Isaiah with a neutral expression. I am sorry, sir, he said, his voice echoing slightly through the quiet room. But we do not work for you. We are contracted by the property management company that oversees this estate, and my orders come directly from the legal owner of this venue. Porch. Our explicit instructions are to ensure this lady remains completely undisturbed. Isaiah froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He turned his head slowly, looking at Vanessa, who was trembling violently in her custom silk gown. Porch. Then he looked over at Vanessa's father, the so-called billionaire healthcare mogul, who was sitting at the VIP table frantically wiping a thick layer of cold sweat from his forehead with a linen napkin. The illusion of their massive generational wealth was hanging by a very thin, fragile thread. And I was holding the scissors. I took a slow, measured step forward, the emerald green suit catching the cool light of the crystal chandeliers. I looked straight at Vanessa's father, watching him squirm under the intense scrutiny of the entire room. "You really sold him a beautiful lie, did you not?" I asked softly, my voice carrying clearly to every corner of the ballroom. "You sold Isaiah a perfect political narrative, a prominent family, a booming medical empire, and a luxury estate that looks like something on the cover of a magazine. It was a perfect corporate merger. He used your campaign contributions to buy a city council seat, and you used his political influence to secure lucrative government medical contracts for your clinics." Vanessa let out a choked sob, clutching her bouquet of white orchids as if it could protect her from the brutal reality. The political elites at the table began to shift uncomfortably. The mayor pulled at his necktie, looking sharply at Vanessa's father. A terrible realization was spreading through the room as everyone realized the grand celebration they were attending was built entirely on sinking sand. "Maintaining an empire is extremely expensive," I continued, pacing slowly in front of the main table. "Especially when your private clinic network has been operating at a severe loss for 3 straight years. Malpractice lawsuits, terrible management, and the massive costs of maintaining appearances in Atlanta high society drained your liquid assets 12 months ago. You started taking out high-interest loans from predatory lenders just to keep the lights on and pay your staff. You smiled at these charity galas, pretending you were at the top of the world, when your accounts were completely overdrawn." Vanessa's father tried to stand up, his chair scraping loudly against the marble floor. "Now listen here," he stammered out, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. "This is private business. You have no right to come in here spewing ridiculous lies. I am a respected man in this community." "I am not spewing lies," I cut him off sharply, silencing him instantly. "I am quoting directly from the notice of default you received. You were so desperate for cash to fund this $1 million wedding and inject money into Isaiah's campaign that you made a fatal mistake. 6 months ago, you put up this entire historical estate as collateral for a massive commercial loan. You gambled your family legacy, betting that Isaiah would win the election and funnel municipal healthcare contracts back to your failing business. It was a desperate gamble, and you lost." A collective gasp echoed across the ballroom. Hundreds of powerful people realized all at once that they were witnessing a financial execution. Isaiah stumbled backward, leaning weakly against the podium on stage. He looked at Vanessa with raw terror in his eyes. He finally understood that he had not married into a billion-dollar medical empire. He had married a sinking ship weighed down by massive debt and desperation. "You missed 3 consecutive payment deadlines," I announced, making sure the donors heard every word. The lender initiated foreclosure proceedings. The debt became a toxic asset on their books, so they put it up for sale to private investment firms. And that is the most interesting thing about commercial real estate. When you default, your debt gets sold to the highest bidder. I gestured gracefully toward Mr. Elias. He unlatched his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of bound legal documents stamped with the official gold seal of the county clerk. "You all know my company," I said, a cold smile spreading across my face. "When I started it, every single one of you thought it was a joke. Isaiah, 2 years ago you sat in my rented apartment and laughed at my business plan. You told me commercial real estate was a man's game, and that I was just playing with pocket change. You told me I lacked the ruthlessness required to build real wealth. Well, I watched how ruthlessly you walked away from me in that parking lot, and I learned a lot from you." I took the documents from my attorney and tossed them onto the table, right next to the torn pieces of the DNA report. Orch. My commercial real estate investment firm bought your defaulted debt exactly 24 hours ago, I announced, the finality of the statement ringing through the air. We paid full cash, and we executed the foreclosure clause immediately. This estate no longer belongs to your family. As of 9 o'clock this morning, the deed was officially transferred to my holding company. Orch. I own the land you are standing on. I own the roof over your head. I own the chandeliers lighting this room. You are hosting a wedding in my building, and your venue rental time has officially expired. Absolute destruction filled the room. It was a masterpiece of financial and social ruin. Vanessa collapsed into her chair, covering her face and sobbing hysterically. Orch. Her father sank into his seat beside her, looking completely deflated and stripped of all his pride. The political donors, the very people who had written massive checks for Isaiah's campaign, began standing up from their tables. They gathered their coats and purses quickly and quietly, desperate to distance themselves from the massive scandal. Isaiah looked completely broken. Orch. The polished politician was gone, replaced by an empty shell of fear. He had just realized that he threw away his actual children in exchange for a mountain of worthless debt. He stared down at his polished leather shoes, shaking his head in silent despair. The walls were closing in on him with no way out. Orch. Yet, while everyone else was reeling from the shock of the asset seizure, one person was furiously calculating a new strategy for survival. I watched Brenda, Isaiah's mother, slowly rise from her chair in the front row. The aggressive, spiteful woman who had threatened to throw me out like garbage was completely gone. In her place stood a master manipulator desperate to switch sides. Orch. Brenda's eyes darted between the legal foreclosure documents on the table, my tailored suit, and finally the expensive stroller holding the triplets. She had just realized that the woman she called a useless, barren hen was now a multimillionaire holding the deed to one of the premier properties in the city. Orch. The gears in her mind were grinding frantically, trying to figure out how to sink her claws into my wealth. Her face underwent a sickening transformation. The hard, bitter lines around her mouth softened completely. She forced tears into her eyes, blinking rapidly and placing a hand over her heart. Orch. She took slow, trembling steps toward me, her voice dripping with a fake, sickly sweet emotion that made my stomach turn. Oh my goodness, Kiana! Brenda coaxed with a manufactured quiver in her voice. She held out both hands as if to embrace me, her sudden change in attitude utterly revolting. The Lord works in mysterious ways, does he not? Orch. I was just so shocked earlier. I did not know what I was saying. I was just acting on a mother's instinct to protect my son. But looking at you now and looking at these precious babies. She took another step forward, bending down slightly to look into the stroller. Unfiltered greed glinted in her eyes. My grandchildren, she whispered, wiping away a fake tear. Orch. My beautiful, perfect grandchildren. You have done so well, Kiana. You built such an incredible life for yourself. You are a strong, successful Black woman, and you brought our family bloodline back to us. We are family, and family stands together through every trial and tribulation. She reached out, trying to gently touch my arm. Orch. Isaiah is a good man deep down, Brenda continued, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper meant only for us, as if we were old friends sharing a secret. He was just confused by these terrible, scheming people. He got lost in politics, but you have his children. You are the mother of his sons. We do not need to make a public scene out of this. Orch. We can sit down, just the four of us, and work this out quietly as a family. A wave of pure nausea washed over me. This woman, after dumping my personal belongings into the dirt, after celebrating my heartbreak, had the nerve to stand before me and try to claim my children as her family simply because I was wealthy now. She did not care about the 3 little boys. Orch. She only cared about the power and money they represented. I slapped her hand away from my arm with a sharp smack that echoed through the quiet space between the tables. I took a physical step back, putting an insurmountable distance between my children and her toxic, greedy claws. I looked at her with pure, unadulterated disgust. George, work this out quietly, I asked, dropping my voice into a low, lethal register that carried the weight of countless sleepless nights. Just like you worked out my medical files quietly 18 months ago? The air in the ballroom froze as those words hung over the VIP table. George, Vanessa's father, a man who had spent decades cultivating an aura of untouchable authority and philanthropy, suddenly looked like a trapped animal. The arrogance of his position dissolved into raw panic. He stared at the thick manila envelope in my hand, tracing the logo of his flagship clinic printed on the front, as if it were a venomous snake about to strike. I did not break eye contact. George, I wanted him to experience the exact suffocating helplessness I felt 18 months ago in that cold medical room. Back then, I had trusted the people in white coats. I had trusted the prestigious name printed on the building. I had believed the devastating diagnosis without question because it was handed to me by a professional in a sterile environment. George, I had no idea that my heartbreak was merely the byproduct of a calculated business transaction. I unlatched the metal clasp on the back of the envelope, my movements slow, precise, and deliberate. The harsh scrape of paper sliding out echoed through the hall, matching the tense silence of the jazz band carefully packing up their instruments to escape. I did not pull out a single sheet of paper. George, I pulled out a thick stack of stapled internal financial records, highly confidential emails, and wire transfer receipts. I turned slightly, making sure the mayor, the police chief, and every major political donor nearby could clearly see what I was holding. I wanted the people funding Isaiah's campaign to see the rotten foundation his political platform was built on. George, you see, building a commercial real estate empire requires a massive amount of due diligence, I began, my voice traveling effortlessly through the silent room. When my company began acquiring the distressed debt of your failing clinic network, we gained complete, unrestricted access to your internal communications and private financial ledgers. George, we had to comb through 3 years of your books to assess the risk of the toxic assets we were buying. I took a slow step closer to the table, my heels clicking sharply. Vanessa's father gripped the edge of the glass table so hard his knuckles turned completely white. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer some corporate defense, but his throat was too dry to produce a sound. George, while my forensic accountants were auditing your hidden accounts, I continued, my tone conversational yet dripping with lethal intent, they discovered a very interesting discrepancy. Exactly 18 months ago, right around the time Isaiah announced his intention to run for city council, your primary business account authorized a highly confidential, untraceable wire transfer. George, I pulled the top page from the stack and tossed it onto the table in front of him. It was a bank statement highlighted in neon marker, showing a massive transfer of funds. $100,000, I announced, letting the magnitude of the number settle into the minds of the wealthy guests. George, $100,000, wired directly from your failing medical corporation to a private offshore account. Normally, corporate embezzlement is boring to me. But this specific transfer caught my attention because the recipient was very specific. I turned my head slowly, locking eyes with Brenda, who was still frozen near the aisle. She looked as if she had just been struck by lightning. George, the fake tearful grandmother act vanished, replaced by pure terror. The account belonged to a newly formed shell company, I stated clearly, and the registered name was the director of the Atlanta First Baptist Church Event Planning Committee, a woman named Brenda. A collective gasp from the church elders in the back rows was loud enough to shake the chandeliers. George, several older women in the congregation stood right up from their chairs, their faces filled with shock and intense disgust. Brenda stumbled backward, clutching her sequin dress, shaking her head frantically in denial. But she could not speak. The evidence was right there in black and white. George, But why would a financially distressed medical mogul give $100,000 to the mother of a rising politician? I asked the room, pretending to ponder the mystery. It makes no logical sense. Until my team accessed the internal emails between your clinic administrators and the chief fertility specialist who conducted my evaluation. I pulled out the next document, a printed email thread with crystal clear, irrefutable text. I held it up high for the room to see. It was a beautiful, completely corrupt merger, I explained, cold fury pulsing beneath my calm exterior. Your medical empire was bleeding cash. You desperately needed lucrative municipal healthcare contracts to save your business from bankruptcy. And Isaiah was a rising political star, almost guaranteed to win a council seat and eventually run for mayor. You needed his power, and he needed the massive campaign funds your family name could provide. This perfect political marriage faced only one minor, extremely inconvenient obstacle. I tapped my chest with a manicured finger. Me. Isaiah was already engaged to me, a woman with no political background, no generational wealth, and absolutely no value to your corporate strategy. I looked back at Vanessa, who was staring at her father with wide, terrified eyes. She had genuinely believed this wedding was about love. Completely unaware, she was just a spoiled pawn used by her father to save a bankrupt business. So you made a deal in the dark, I continued, every word colder and sharper than the last. Brenda took the $100,000 to facilitate the breakup and publicly tarnish my reputation within the church community. In exchange, you ordered your clinic staff to falsify my medical records. You instructed my doctor to look me in the eye and hand me a fake diagnosis, claiming I had irreversible infertility. You knew Isaiah was running on a family values platform. You knew he needed an heir to secure his political image. So you handed him the perfect excuse to abandon me, clearing the path for him to marry your daughter and cement your corrupt political alliance. Absolute chaos erupted in the ballroom. Political donors stood up, shouting demands for answers from Isaiah and Vanessa's father. Church elders angrily confronted Brenda, their voices laced with righteous fury. The elegant $1 million wedding had completely turned into an active crime scene of corporate and moral corruption. Isaiah leaned against the stage, gasping for air as he looked at his mother and then at Vanessa's father. The truth completely broke his mind. He had always thought he was the mastermind behind his success, the brilliant politician controlling everyone around him. He had no idea he was merely a puppet, a piece of merchandise priced, traded, and bought by two greedy, desperate families behind closed doors. He stumbled forward, his tuxedo jacket rumpled and sweat dripping down his face. He pointed a shaking finger at Vanessa's father, his voice wild. You paid my mother to fake her medical records? You set me up? You made me look like a complete monster? Vanessa's father slammed his fist onto the table, rattling the expensive silverware onto the floor as he finally found his voice amidst the chaos. I was protecting my investment, he roared back, his face purple. You needed my money to buy your votes. Do you think you would have gotten anywhere without my family's backing? You are nothing without me. Vanessa let out a sharp, painful scream, covering her ears as she watched her father and her new husband curse at each other like wild dogs right in front of the ruined wedding cake. Brenda was swarmed by angry church members. She sobbed hysterically, trying to claim she donated the money to charity, a lie so transparent it only enraged the congregation further. The two families tore each other apart right at the altar in front of everyone. The refined, elegant veneer of Atlanta high society was ripped away, exposing the rotten, desperate greed underneath. It was a magnificent, terrifying spectacle of self-destruction, and I had simply provided the match to light the fuse. I watched the chaos unfold, feeling the massive weight I carried for 18 months finally lift off my shoulders. The nightmares in the clinic, the tears shed in the parking lot, the countless nights wondering why I was not good enough, all vanished into nothingness. I was not broken, I was simply the target of a conspiracy, and I survived. But I was not quite finished. I did not come here just to expose a lie. I came to burn their empire to the ground and salt the earth so nothing would ever grow there again. I raised my hand and snapped my fingers sharply. The sound was not loud, but the intent was clear, cutting right through the shouting. If you think a real estate mortgage is the only deal in play here, you should really take a look at your clinic's internal emails, I announced, forcing the room back into a tense, breathless silence. I looked at Isaiah as he caught his breath, staring at me with a mix of hatred and absolute terror. I signaled to Mr. Elias, who was standing near the audiovisual control panel at the back of the room. The massive projection screens on either side of the stage had been looping photos of Isaiah and Vanessa looking perfectly in love. With a press of a button from Mr. Elias, those romantic images vanished. The screens went dark for a second before the harsh, bright glare of high-resolution, scanned documents lit up the entire ballroom, casting long shadows across the terrified faces of the wedding party. The first document projected on the 20-foot screens was a certified bank statement. The numbers were massive, clearly legible even to guests in the very back row. I pointed at the screen, my voice echoing through the quiet, terrified crowd. As I just told you, this is a certified wire transfer record from the primary operating account of the bride's family medical group. The amount is exactly $100,000, and the recipient is the Community Outreach Fund for Atlanta First Baptist Church. I turned my gaze back to Brenda, who was practically cowering near the floor. I reminded her that she was the sole signatory on that specific church account with completely unrestricted access to those funds. I explained to everyone in the room that a failing medical business donating $100,000 to a church committee made no logical sense unless you knew exactly what that money was buying. Mr. Elias pressed the button again. The screen flashed, and a new document appeared. An internal email thread. The header clearly displayed the official clinic email address of the chief fertility specialist who diagnosed me 18 months ago. The sender was Vanessa's father. I read the text aloud, forcing every single person in the room to hear the horrific depravity of their actions. The email explicitly instructed the clinic administrator to intercept my blood work samples and alter the official lab results. It detailed how to forge a diagnosis of completely irreversible infertility. It even included a script for the doctor to use when delivering the fake news to Isaiah and me. Another email flashed on the screen, showing Brenda replying from her private email to haggle over the final price of the bribe, promising to ensure Isaiah ended our engagement the very day of the diagnosis. She even added a spiteful comment about how my humble background made me unfit to be a politician's wife. The crowd stirred, shock waving through the room. I took a step closer to the stage, ensuring Isaiah was forced to look at the screen. I told him his mother hated me with a cold clinical precision because she hated my independence, knowing I would never be the submissive political wife she desperately wanted for her son. Then I shifted the focus to reveal the bigger picture. I pointed out that Vanessa's father desperately needed a lifeline while his medical empire was suffocating under commercial debt. He needed guaranteed city medical contracts to save his family legacy, and Isaiah was a rising star. It was the ultimate arrangement. I pointed at the panicked, wealthy families by the main table. Vanessa's father bought Isaiah's political future. Brenda got the wealthy, high-society daughter-in-law she always wanted, along with a massive cash payout, disguised as a church donation. And I was the obstacle, the woman wearing the engagement ring. I explained that they could not simply ask Isaiah to leave me, because his entire campaign was built on the image of a devoted family man. They needed a reason that allowed him to abandon me, while keeping his hands clean in the eyes of voters. I watched the realization slowly wash over Isaiah's face as his eyes moved from the massive screen to his mother and then to Vanessa's father. His entire adult life, Isaiah believed he was the smartest man in the room, the master manipulator controlling everyone around him. Standing on that stage, he finally realized the terrifying truth. He was not the architect of his own life. He was merely a product, a piece of merchandise negotiated, priced, and traded by his mother and his father-in-law behind closed doors. Brenda began to sob violently, reaching out for Isaiah, but he shoved her away aggressively, shouting at her not to touch him with deep betrayal and rage. He screamed at her for selling his life, accusing her of faking medical records and manipulating him into marrying a woman he did not love just to get a secret cash payout. Vanessa's father slammed his fist onto the glass table, sending silver cutlery clattering to the floor. Finding his voice in the chaos, his face turned bright red as he roared at Isaiah to stop playing the victim, calling him a greedy, selfish opportunist. He pointed out that Isaiah threw me away the second he thought I could not provide a political family, proving Isaiah did not care about love or loyalty, only his campaign. He yelled that Isaiah was completely willing to discard a woman for family money and influence, making him just as corrupt as the rest of them. Vanessa let out a sharp, painful scream, grabbing the edges of her custom dress and tearing the delicate lace in total hysteria. She turned to her father, heavy makeup running down her face in dark, ugly streaks, screaming hysterically and accusing him of ruining her wedding and her entire life. She sobbed that he had promised her Isaiah genuinely loved her, and that realizing her marriage was nothing more than a corporate acquisition to save a failing company completely shattered her reality. High society guests watched in horror. The political elite of Atlanta, the wealthy donors who had written massive checks for Isaiah's campaign, stood up and backed away from the tables as if the family carried a contagious disease. I watched the mayor whisper urgently to his assistant before turning his back on the stage entirely. Church elders who had supported Brenda for decades were weeping and praying openly, shaking their heads at the sheer evil that had just been exposed. Smartphones were held high in the air, recording every second of the disastrous implosion. The pristine, elite image of two powerful Atlanta families was turning to ash in spectacular fashion. The damage to their social standing and political ambitions was permanent and completely irreversible. I stood quietly near the center aisle, untouched and unmoved by the chaos. The jazz musicians had completely abandoned their instruments, staring open-mouthed at the shouting match on stage. Isaiah lunged toward Vanessa's father, requiring his groomsmen to physically restrain him. Brenda collapsed onto the polished marble floor, wailing and beating her fists against the ground in a pathetic display of self-inflicted victimhood. Heather stood at the edge of the room, looking thoroughly satisfied, watching the toxic family that once tormented her finally get what they deserved. My 3 sons remained remarkably calm, the massive noise filtered by the soft lining of the stroller, not disturbing them in the slightest. My peaceful, structured reality stood in stark contrast to their loud, filthy destruction. It was the most beautiful sight I had ever seen. I did not even need to raise my voice to destroy them. I simply handed them the truth and watched them tear each other apart. The 2 families clawed at each other at the altar, stripping away the social status they carefully maintained for decades, destroying themselves with a brutality I could never match on my own. I waited for a brief pause in the screaming before speaking again, my voice cutting cleanly through the thick, toxic air. Save your energy, I said calmly, adjusting the silk wrap on my chest where my youngest son still slept peacefully. You are going to need it for the billing department. A suffocating paralysis completely gripped the ballroom as my words echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Isaiah stopped screaming at his mother and slowly turned his head to look at me. The manic rage that had consumed him just seconds ago quickly dissolved into a new, terrifyingly deep sense of dread. He thought the public humiliation and the collapse of his political marriage was the final blow. He thought the worst was over. He was dead wrong, because the real financial execution was only getting started. I gave a slight nod toward the back of the room. Mr. Porch. Elias, my chief corporate attorney, who had been standing quietly near the audio-visual equipment, stepped forward once again. He did not rush. He walked down the center aisle with the slow, methodical pace of a predator that knows its prey is cornered. He held a thick stack of legal documents bound in dark blue covers, bearing the unmistakable raised gold seal of the state family court. Porch. The heavy, rhythmic sound of his expensive leather shoes tapping against the marble floor sounded like a clock ticking down the final seconds of Isaiah's ruined life. Mr. Elias bypassed the sobbing bride and her furious father, completely ignoring the chaotic wreck on the stage. He walked straight to the edge of the platform where Isaiah stood. Porch. Isaiah tried to step back, but his legs trembled so violently he could barely keep his balance. Mr. Elias did not wait for an invitation. He simply reached out and pressed the heavy stack of legal papers firmly against the sweat-soaked chest of Isaiah's tuxedo. "You have been formally served," Mr. Elias announced, his voice completely calm and devoid of emotion. Porch. Isaiah instinctively clutched the documents to keep them from falling to the floor. His hands shook so intensely that the heavy paper rustled loudly in the quiet room. He stared blankly at the cover page, his eyes scanning the formal legal terminology. He looked completely lost, unable to grasp the massive financial tsunami that had just landed on his head. Porch. I took a step closer to the stage, ensuring that the political donors and wealthy church elders still lingering near the exits could hear every detail of his financial ruin. "For the past 18 months, you spent all your energy crafting a very specific public image." "Isaiah," I explained, my voice smooth, as if discussing the weather rather than his absolute destruction. "Porch. You went on local television, bragging about your immense success. You flaunted your 6-figure consulting salary on social media. You took journalists on tours of your newly built luxury home, proudly showing off your fleet of expensive cars. You wanted Atlanta voters to believe you were an exceptionally wealthy, thriving businessman." Porch. I paused, watching the color drain completely from his face as the realization began to take shape in his mind. "The family court judge reviewing my petition was very impressed by your public financial disclosures," I continued with a cold smile. "When my legal team filed for child support, we did not even need to hire forensic accountants to prove your income." Porch. "We simply submitted a portfolio of your own campaign speeches and social media posts. You legally documented your immense wealth for the entire world, and the judge accepted every single one of your public claims when calculating your monthly support obligations." Isaiah looked down at the paperwork, his eyes frantically searching the pages for the final number. Porch. When he found it, his entire body went completely rigid. He let out a choked gasp, as if the air had been punched straight out of his lungs. "That is a retroactive child support mandate," I stated clearly, letting the sentence hang heavily in the air. "You see, Isaiah, raising triplets is an exceptionally costly endeavor. There were specialized medical bills for a high-risk multiple pregnancy. Porch. There were months spent in the neonatal intensive care unit. There are round-the-clock childcare costs, specialized formula, and continuous medical monitoring." Porch. "The court ruled that since you are the established biological father through certified DNA testing, the very papers your family tore up moments ago, you bear 50% financial responsibility for every single penny spent from the exact moment of conception." Mr. Elias stepped forward to clarify the legal mechanics, leaving zero room for misunderstanding. Porch. He looked directly at Isaiah, speaking with brutal precision. "The amount you see on that page is not a suggestion, sir," Mr. Elias explained. "It is a mandatory court order. Because you failed to disclose your dependents and actively bragged about possessing vast liquid assets, The judge applied the maximum allowable percentage for 3 infants under state guidelines. Orch, the retroactive arrears alone amount to hundreds of thousands of dollars, payable immediately upon receipt of these documents. Isaiah began to hyperventilate. Hugging the blue-bound documents tightly to his chest, he shook his head in frantic denial. "I cannot pay this," he stammered, his voice cracking into high-pitched panic. "This is astronomical. I do not have this kind of liquid cash. Orch, my money is tied up in the campaign. You cannot do this to me." Mr. Elias adjusted his glasses, entirely unmoved by the political candidate's breakdown. "Actually, sir, the court anticipated your lack of cooperation. The documents in your hands include an immediately effective wage garnishment order. Your consulting firm has already been legally served. Orch, the maximum allowable percentage of every single paycheck you earn will be automatically transferred to my client's account before you ever see a dime." The sheer brutality of the legal trap was breathtaking. Isaiah looked desperately toward the empty seats, where his political donors had been sitting just 20 minutes earlier. Orch, the wealthy businessmen who were supposed to fund his rise to power were gone, having fled the ballroom to distance themselves from the unfolding scandal. He had no sponsors left. He had no wealthy father-in-law to bail him out. "But that is not even the worst part, Isaiah," I said, taking slow, deliberate steps toward the stage. "When you set up your political campaign, you made a fatal error. Orch. You commingled funds from your personal consulting LLC with your campaign accounts to hide the payments you received from Vanessa's father. You thought you were clever, moving money through shell entities to avoid tax liabilities. However, when you commingle personal assets with campaign funds, you legally strip away the corporate shield that protects those accounts from family court collections. Orch. You pierced your own corporate veil." Isaiah collapsed directly onto his knees on the polished hardwood stage. The fabric of his expensive tuxedo pants tore on a piece of shattered champagne glass, but he did not seem to notice the pain. Dropping the legal files, he grabbed his hair with both hands, pulling at it in utter despair. "Mr. Orch." Elias delivered the final devastating blow. "As of 8 o'clock this morning, all bank accounts associated with you, including your primary campaign fund, have been legally frozen by state authorities until the retroactive support arrears are paid in full. Your credit cards will be declined. Your business accounts are locked. You have zero access to your wealth. You are completely broke." Orch. The room fell terrifyingly quiet. The jazz band had quietly slipped out the back exit. The catering staff retreated into the kitchen. In that massive $1 million ballroom, the only sound left was the pathetic, broken sobbing of the man who had once tried to discard me like trash. Isaiah knelt on the stage, surrounded by shattered glass from his ruined celebration. Orch. The arrogant, confident politician who had tried to order security to throw me into the street was completely gone. Stripped of his money, his power, his new bride, and his public dignity, he had nothing left besides the expensive suit on his back. He lifted his head to look at me, his face covered in sweat and tears. Orch. The defiance in his eyes was gone, replaced by a desperate, groveling panic that made my stomach turn. He began crawling toward the edge of the stage, moving on all fours like a defeated animal. "Kiana, please," he begged, his voice breaking into ugly sobs. "Please do not do this to me. I am begging you. This will ruin my life. My career is over. My campaign is dead. I am going to lose the house. Orch, I am going to lose everything." I stood completely still, looking down at the man who had abandoned me in a parking lot when I needed him most. I felt no sympathy. I felt no pity. I simply watched him grovel, amazed at how easily his pride crumbled the moment his money was taken away. "Orch, Kiana. We loved each other once," Isaiah cried, reaching his hand out toward me, though he did not dare touch the fabric of my green suit. Tears streamed down his cheeks, dripping onto the stage. "You were my first true love. We had dreams together. We talked about building a life. I know I made a terrible mistake. I was just pushed too hard by my mother and the pressure of the campaign. Porch. I lost my way, Kiana. I was terrified. But I always loved you. Please, for the sake of what we used to mean to each other, show some mercy. Drop the suit. We can fix this together. I want to be a father to my sons. The sheer absurdity and audacity of his plea echoed through the air. He was trying to weaponize the love he had so coldly thrown away. Porch. He was trying to use the very children he had claimed were part of an extortion scam just moments ago to save his frozen bank accounts. I looked down at the 3 little boys resting quietly in the stroller and the custom silk wrap. They were safe, they were secure, and they would never, ever have to rely on a weak, pathetic man to survive. Porch. I had built an empire to ensure they would never experience the cold rejection their father had once inflicted on me. I looked back down at Isaiah kneeling in the broken glass. A cold, razor-sharp laugh escaped my lips, cutting through the heavy silence of the ballroom. There was zero warmth in the sound. It was the voice of a woman whose heart had been forged in pure steel. Porch. You never loved me, Isaiah, I said, my voice dropping to a chilling whisper that carried the weight of absolute finality. You do not even understand what love is. You loved the aesthetic of success. You loved the illusion of a quiet, submissive wife who looked good on campaign posters. You loved the power and money Vanessa's family promised you. But you never loved me. Porch. And you certainly do not love these children. Right now, you are simply mourning the death of your own ego. He continued to sob, covering his face with his hands, his broad shoulders trembling violently as the reality of his total ruin sank into his bones. This grand, elegant wedding had become both his financial and social grave. Porch. Speaking of aesthetics, I added, tilting my head slightly as a new sound began to penetrate the heavy oak doors of the ballroom. The faint but rhythmic wail of sirens grew rapidly louder, approaching the front gates of the estate. Red and blue emergency lights flashed through the stained glass windows, casting chaotic, colorful shadows across the walls of the reception hall. Porch. I looked down at Isaiah's tear-streaked face, a final chilling smile spreading across my lips. I am afraid those flashing lights outside are going to completely ruin your wedding photos. The deafening wail of sirens shattered whatever quiet remained inside the grand ballroom. Intense red and blue lights flashed frantically through the ornate stained glass windows surrounding the estate. Porch. The colors bounced off the terrified faces of the wedding guests, casting long, chaotic shadows across white tablecloths and ruined floral arrangements. It was a terrifying light show, signaling the absolute end of their reign. Isaiah remained frozen on his knees, staring blankly at the flashing lights reflected on the polished marble floor. Porch. The reality of his complete destruction was setting in, but the universe was not finished settling the score with his new family just yet. The heavy oak doors at the main entrance were thrown open with a violent thud. A squad of men and women wearing tactical gear and dark windbreakers flooded into the reception hall. Porch. The bold yellow letters on their jackets spelled out the acronym for federal law enforcement. Moving with swift, trained precision, they fanned out to secure every exit in the ballroom. High society guests gasped and backed away, crowding together in fear as federal agents completely took control of the room. Porch. The lead agent, a tall, stern man with a silver badge clipped to his belt, marched straight down the center aisle. He completely ignored the ruined wedding cake and the sobbing bride, heading straight for the main VIP table where Vanessa's father sat frozen shock. Vanessa's father tried to summon the arrogant billionaire mask that had protected him for decades. Porch. Puffing out his chest and adjusting his rumpled tuxedo jacket, he loudly demanded to know the meaning of this intrusion. He shouted that he was a respected healthcare professional and that they had no right to interrupt his daughter's wedding. The federal agent did not even blink. Porch. Offering no polite explanations or private warnings, he simply pulled out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs and informed the medical mogul that he was under formal arrest for systemic healthcare fraud, massive corporate embezzlement, and federal wire fraud. The sharp click of metal handcuffs locking around the so-called billionaire's wrists echoed loudly through the broad room. Porch. Vanessa let out a blood-curdling scream. Collapsing onto the floor, she clutched her father's arm, frantically trying to pull him away from the federal agents. She sobbed hysterically, begging them to stop and shouting that there had to be a terrible mistake. Her perfect fairy tale life was being violently torn apart, replaced by the brutal reality of a federal indictment. Porch. That was when Heather stepped forward once again. Walking over to the VIP table, her soft pink bridesmaid dress brushed against the floor. She looked down at the weeping bride and the handcuffed medical mogul with a look of deep, absolute satisfaction. "There is no mistake here, Vanessa," Heather said, her voice carrying clearly over the family's cries. "They know exactly what your father did. Porch. They know the codes for the phantom billing. They know about the shell companies used to hide massive corporate debt. They know everything because I handed them the evidence myself." Isaiah's head snapped up from the stage, his tear-streaked face twisting into a mask of pure disbelief. Porch. He stared at his sister-in-law, entirely unable to comprehend how the quiet, submissive woman he had always ignored could be the architect behind a massive federal raid. "Do you understand, Isaiah?" Heather continued, turning her sharp gaze toward the broken politician kneeling in the glass. "For 5 years, this toxic family treated me like I was invisible. Your mother insulted my background. Porch. You and your brother mocked my intelligence. You all thought I was just a foolish, quiet accessory who should be grateful just to have a seat at the family table. But the most interesting thing about being invisible is that nobody notices you when you are watching them. Nobody guards themselves when you quietly copy the encrypted hard drives they carelessly leave in the home office. Porch. Nobody cares when you memorize the passwords to the private servers hiding the embezzlement ledgers." Heather flashed a bright, triumphant smile that lit up her entire face. She explained to the stunned audience that the DNA testing samples she had mailed to me were just a minor personal favor. Porch. Her true masterpiece was working covertly as a confidential informant for the federal government over the past 6 months. She had meticulously gathered every piece of evidence necessary to dismantle the corrupt medical empire that funded their arrogant family, handing a rock-solid case to federal prosecutors on a silver platter. Porch. The political donors sitting at nearby tables suddenly realized they were in catastrophic danger. Trapped in a room locked down by federal agents, they were witnessing the arrest of a major campaign funder. Their own reputations, businesses, and political futures were hanging by a thread. The survival instinct of the wealthy elite, once activated, is ruthless. Porch. The largest donor in the room, a man who had recently written a massive 6-figure check to fund Isaiah's city council campaign, suddenly burst out from the crowd. He marched toward the stage with aggressive, hurried steps, looking at Isaiah not with sympathy, but as if he were looking at a diseased dog. Porch. Leaning down, the donor picked up the microphone Isaiah had dropped on the hardwood floor earlier. The high-pitched screech of microphone feedback cut through the air, instantly capturing the attention of everyone in the ballroom, including the federal agents processing the arrest. Porch. Standing tall, the donor squared his shoulders to address the crowd, making sure the guests recording on their smartphones caught every single word of his public condemnation. "My name is Mr. Harris," the donor announced, his voice booming through the speakers. "As chairman of the Regional Political Action Committee, I am making an official emergency statement on behalf of our entire coalition. Porch. We are thoroughly disgusted and appalled by the deep moral corruption and horrific financial fraud revealed in this room today." He turned, glaring down fiercely at Isaiah, who was still shaking on all fours on the ground. Mr. Harris pointed an angry finger at the broken man. "We supported you because you sold us a political platform built on family values and community integrity. Porch. You looked us dead in the eye and swore to be a pillar of morality for this city. Yet we find out you are a manipulative, lying opportunist who abandoned his own biological children and conspired with federal criminals to buy an election. The donor raised his voice, ensuring his complete detachment from the scandal was officially recorded. Effective immediately, all political endorsements for Isaiah are permanently revoked. We formally demand the immediate return of every single dollar donated to your campaign fund. You are a disgrace to this city, and we will ensure you never hold public office for the rest of your life. Loud shouts of agreement erupted from the other donors in the room. They applauded and voiced their condemnations, eagerly throwing Isaiah to the wolves to save their own reputations. The political execution was swift, brutal, and utterly merciless. Isaiah buried his face in his hands and wept openly as the last lingering hope for his future burned to the ground. His campaign was dead. His finances were seized. His new family was being led out the door in handcuffs. Brenda stood at the edge of the ruined reception area, staring blankly at the nightmare unfolding around her. Her mind was entirely unable to process the speed and absolute completeness of the destruction. She watched federal agents lead Vanessa's father out through the massive oak doors. She watched political donors aggressively disown her son in public. She looked down at the torn DNA reports still lying on the polished floor. In less than 30 minutes, her entire world had evaporated. Generational wealth, high society status, prominent church positions, all of it was completely gone. A sickening, terrifying clarity washed over her as she realized she was left with nothing. There was no wealthy daughter-in-law to brag about, no successful politician's son to leverage in her social circles. She was an outcast, a ruined, bankrupt pariah in the very community she had tried to rule. Her wild, panicked eyes searched the ballroom, desperately seeking any remaining lifesaver to grab onto amid the wreckage. Her gaze slowly moved away from her sobbing, disgraced son, finally locking onto me. She looked at the custom stroller. She looked at the baby sleeping safely inside the silk wrap against my chest. She realized that the only true wealth, the only real legacy in the entire room, was sitting right in front of the woman she had maliciously thrown onto the street. A primal, choked wail escaped Brenda's throat. Her knees gave out completely under the weight of utter despair, hitting the cold, polished marble hard as her ugly sequin dress bunched up around her legs. She did not try to stand up. Instead, she began crawling forward, moving across the floor like a desperate beggar. Ignoring the federal agent securing the scene and the loud, hysterical cries of the abandoned bride, she dragged her body across the marble, reaching her hands out blindly toward me. Tears poured down her heavily powdered face, ruining her expensive makeup and leaving dark, dirty streaks along her cheeks. Stopping a few feet away from the stroller, she looked up at me with pure, crushing agony. She clasped her trembling hands tightly against her chest in a gesture of desperate pleading. "Kiana, please," Brenda wailed, her voice cracking into a pathetic, raspy plea that rose above the chaotic noise of the room. "Please, have mercy. Those are my babies. Those are my beautiful grandchildren. Please, let me hold them. Let me see their faces. Do not take my family away from me, Kiana. Let me see my grandchildren before I lose everything. Please, let me see them before my life completely falls apart." Brenda continued, crawling across the cold, polished marble floor, her tear-stained face lifted like a pathetic mask of absolute desperation. Her knees dragged across the shredded pieces of the DNA reports, completely oblivious to the federal agents reading Miranda rights to Vanessa's father just a few feet away. As she reached out with trembling hands, the large diamond rings on her fingers made a harsh, scraping sound against the stone floor. She gasped for air, hyperventilating as she stared at the luxury stroller. The sheer, toxic sense of entitlement this woman possessed was stunning. Did she genuinely believe a few desperate tears could magically erase 18 months of calculated cruelty? Did she truly think that mere biological relation automatically granted her access to these children, when she was the one who had ordered her son to discard them like garbage? Ouch. She pushed her body forward one last time, trying to close the final few inches between her knees and the front wheels of the stroller. Raising her right hand with fingers outstretched, she reached toward the soft, protective fabric of the stroller canopy. She never touched it. Ouch. Moving with lightning speed, I stepped directly into her path, the heels of my designer shoes planting firmly onto the marble floor. I used my body as an impenetrable shield between her greedy hands and my children. I looked down at her with cold eyes, entirely devoid of human sympathy, causing her to instinctively shrink back. Ouch. Without raising my voice or shouting, I conveyed the absolute authority of a mother protecting her empire and bloodline from predators. A few seconds later, the heavy glass door opens, and Heather steps into the room. She looks completely different from the stressed, exhausted woman I saw, wearing that ugly, soft pink bridesmaid dress. Ouch. She wears a sharply tailored navy blue business suit, her hair styled in a chic, professional cut. The dark circles under her eyes are completely gone, replaced by a bright, clear energy that radiates absolute freedom. She looks around the massive corner office, taking in the panoramic skyline view and polished modern accents before her eyes land on me. Ouch. Letting out a long breath, a smile spreads across her face as she walks toward my desk. I stand up to greet her, feeling a profound mutual respect for the woman standing before me. We are no longer victims of a cruel narcissistic family. We are the architects who destroyed them, and we both walked out of the wreckage stronger than ever. Ouch. I hope you do not mind me dropping by unannounced, Heather says, sitting down across from my desk. I figured if I did not mention the tracking receipt, the front desk might turn me away. That was the absolute best password, I reply, sitting back down and crossing my hands. It is wonderful to see you, Heather. You look like you have been getting amazing sleep lately. Ouch. She laughs, a genuine, relaxed sound filling the quiet office. You have no idea, she says, leaning comfortably back in her chair. Once you clear all the toxic waste out of your life, the air feels so much fresher. I nod in agreement, understanding the feeling completely. Transitioning from a state of constant, defensive anxiety into a space of pure, undisturbed peace is the greatest reward of all. Ouch. When Heather gathered evidence to dismantle that medical fraud syndicate, she proved her loyalty and incredible intelligence. Her strategic talent and quiet resilience matched my own. She did not come to my office just to catch up. A woman like Heather does not walk into a corporate headquarters without a clear purpose. So, I say, looking at her closely, the dust has settled. Ouch. The villains are broke. We both got what we wanted. Heather, what brings you to my office on this side of town? She looks at me, her gaze sharp and focused. Reaching into her designer tote bag, she pulls out a sleek silver folder and sets it gently on my glass desk. She looks completely calm and unbothered, like a woman ready to build her own empire. Ouch. I came to fulfill a silent promise, she says simply. I came to talk about my future. I opened the silver folder she slid across the table, expecting a resume or a business proposal. Instead, the first document staring back at me is a finalized divorce decree, stamped with the heavy seal of the state court. Ouch. Malik's name is printed at the top as the defendant, while Heather's name stands proudly as the plaintiff. I look up from the legal paperwork, a slow smile spreading across my face. She actually did it. She completely severed the rotting cord that bound her to that parasitic family. Ouch. I told him. I was leaving the morning after the wedding raid, Heather explains, her voice steady, without a trace of regret. He tried using his mother's usual manipulation tactics, telling me I was nothing without his family name, and that I was making a huge mistake, leaving a man with his connections. Ouch. But the most interesting thing about connections is that when your entire family gets blacklisted by every major bank and PAC in the city, those connections become entirely useless. Heather leans back, crossing her legs with the easy confidence of a woman who just dropped 200 pounds of dead weight. The divorce went surprisingly fast, she continues, because he could not afford to fight me in court. Isaiah's financial ruin spilled right over into Malik's accounts since they foolishly co-signed loans on several luxury cars to maintain their fake wealthy image. When creditors came to repossess the vehicles, Malik was too busy dodging phone calls to fight me on the divorce agreement. His toxic aunts tried to intimidate me during mediation, calling me a traitor and a snake. But I simply reminded them that federal prosecutors were still looking for co-conspirators in Brenda's church embezzlement case. They shut their mouths instantly and vanished. I walked out of that marriage with my dignity, my savings, and zero connection to their bloodline. I nod slowly, closing the silver folder and resting my hands on the glass desk. Walking away from poison is just the first step, I say, my voice calm and professional. But building a new foundation is the real challenge. You said you came to talk about your future, Heather. What does that future look like to you? She does not hesitate. Reaching into her tote bag again, she pulls out a second folder. This one is pure white and organized flawlessly. She hands it to me. For the past 5 years, I worked quietly in corporate management while dealing with my in-laws' endless mind games, she says. I know how to read people, Kiana. I can spot a liar, a manipulator, and a hypocrite from a mile away. I know how to build a secure corporate environment because I spent half a decade surviving in a hostile one. She leans forward, resting her hands on her knees. Your real estate firm is expanding exponentially. You are acquiring new properties, launching major commercial projects, and hiring hundreds of new employees. You need an executive director of human resources who operates with absolute, ruthless integrity. You need someone who will protect your corporate culture with the same fierceness you use to protect your children. I want that position, and I am the best person for the job. I open the white folder and scan the flawless resume inside. Her credentials are outstanding, having managed corporate restructuring for major logistics firms before putting her career on hold when she married Malik. But her true value goes far beyond any corporate degree. Heather demonstrated a level of loyalty and strategic intelligence that money simply cannot buy. She risked her own safety and marriage to send me the DNA samples that saved my life. She worked as a top-secret federal informant to dismantle a corrupt medical syndicate. She stood in a ballroom full of angry elites and exposed the truth without her voice shaking once. She is sharp, fearless, and exactly the kind of woman I want by my side as I conquer the rest of this city. Closing the folder, I look her dead in the eye, taking a moment to let the weight of the offer settle between us. The base corporate salary for this executive position is well into the 6 figures, I state, ensuring she understands the scope of the offer. It comes with full executive benefits, stock options in the holding company, and a corner office on this exact floor. However, the expectations are absolute. I will not tolerate internal corporate politics, and I will never accept toxic behavior. Heather, we are building an empire here, and we do it with clean hands. Your first assignment will be implementing an ironclad vetting policy to ensure no one with a background like Isaiah or Vanessa's father ever makes it past our lobby. Heather smiles, her eyes flashing with fierce determination and deep relief. I would expect nothing less, she replies. I reach my hand across the glass desk. Welcome to the company, I say as our hands lock in a firm, powerful handshake, solidifying our new alliance. We are no longer just survivors of the same nightmare. We are partners in a brand new reality. Just as our meeting concludes, a soft sound drifts from the private soundproof nursery connected to my office. The hidden wooden door sits slightly open, and the quiet, happy babbling of my 3 sons floats into the executive suite. Heather looks toward the door, her smile softening completely, losing its sharp corporate edge. Go ahead, I say, pointing toward the nursery. They just woke up from their morning nap. Together, we step into the bright, airy nursery. It is a large, beautiful space designed to match the modern elegance of the rest of the penthouse suite. Plush, hypoallergenic carpet covers the hardwood floor, and sunlight streams through thick, soundproof glass windows. Porch. My 3 boys sit on a massive luxury playmat, surrounded by soft building blocks and educational toys. They are healthy, vibrant, and deeply loved. As we walk in, their amber-brown eyes look up at us, and 3 identical, incredibly bright smiles light up their little faces. Heather kneels at the edge of the playmat, gently handing a soft blue block to my youngest boy. Porch. They are beautiful, Kiana, she says softly, watching them play an absolute peace. They look so happy and so incredibly safe. I stand in the doorway, watching my children thrive in the exact environment their biological family tried to deny them. They are completely unexposed to the screaming, manipulation, and desperate greed of the people who share their DNA. Porch. They will never know what it feels like to be viewed as a political prop or a financial burden. They will only ever know a mother's absolute, unconditional devotion, a mother who reshaped the world just to ensure they had a soft place to land. 18 months ago, a cold clinic doctor and a cruel old woman called me a barren tree that could bear no fruit. Porch. Now I look at 3 perfect, vibrant lives I created all on my own. I let Heather play with the boys for a while before walking slowly back to my main office. Moving past my heavy glass desk, I stand right at the edge of the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city of Atlanta stretches endlessly beneath my feet, a massive grid of glass, steel, and endless potential. Porch. The deep blue autumn morning sky provides a perfect backdrop for the towering skyscrapers. I place my hand flat against the cool glass, looking down at the busy streets below. Somewhere down in that crowded, noisy city, the people who tried to break me are struggling just to get through the day. Porch. Isaiah sits in a cramped office cubicle, watching his meager paycheck get heavily garnished to fund the very empire he once mocked. Brenda scans barcodes at a checkout counter, terrified of making eye contact with her former friends. Vanessa sits in a small apartment, weeping over her father's federal prison sentence. Porch. They are all trapped in their own personal hells, completely consumed by the consequences of their own toxic arrogance. Yet, up here in the quiet, peaceful atmosphere of this soaring penthouse, I feel nothing but pure, unadulterated freedom. My entire life, I was taught that family is strictly defined by blood. Porch. Society conditions women to forgive, smooth things over, and settle for far less than they deserve, all to maintain the fake illusion of a happy family. We are conditioned to offer our loyalty to those who share our genes, no matter how terribly they treat us, or how casually they discard us when our usefulness runs out. Porch. Looking out over the city I am actively helping to build, I finally realize that everything I was taught was a complete lie. Family has absolutely nothing to do with bloodlines, social status, or keeping up appearances before church elders. Family is about respect. It is about absolute loyalty. Porch. Family is made of the people who stand firmly by your side when you hit rock bottom, when the entire world points a finger and tells you that you are nothing. Family is the woman kneeling on my nursery floor playing with my sons, because she chose to protect us when she risked losing everything herself. Porch. Family is the empire you build with your own hands, surrounded by people who value your strength rather than trying to destroy it out of fear. I recall that freezing day in the clinic parking lot when I felt so unimaginably small. I thought my life was over simply because a weak, ambitious man told me I was a dead end. Porch. I cried on the front lawn, watching a cruel woman throw my clothes into the dirt. They tried to bury me under the weight of their own massive insecurities. They assumed I would quietly fade into the background, letting them live their fake, wealthy lives undisturbed. What they failed to realize is that when you try to bury a woman who knows her true worth, you are simply planting a seed. Porch. I took their rejection, cruelty, and incredible arrogance, and used it as fuel to forge an indestructible reality. I did not seek revenge through physical fights or screaming in the streets. I sought the most devastating, permanent revenge possible. I simply became wildly, outrageously successful. I bought their venue. I exposed their criminal records. I took absolute control of my own narrative. Torch. I weaponized my pain, turning it into a multi-million-dollar portfolio that insulates me from their reach forever. I watch a massive crane moving slowly in the distance, constructing a high-rise building funded by my firm. The world keeps moving forward, and I am no longer a victim standing on the sidelines waiting for someone to validate my existence. Torch. I am the architect making the calls, redesigning the skyline to fit my vision. Turning away from the view, I look back toward the nursery. The soft, happy laughter of my 3 sons blends seamlessly with Heather's gentle voice. My heart feels incredibly full. There is no lingering anger, no bitterness. Torch. The past has been completely erased, washed clean by the sheer weight of the beautiful, safe life I created. I cross my arms over my custom emerald suit, a slow, deep smile spreading across my face. I take a deep breath of the cool, clean air circulating through the penthouse. For the very first time in my life, I feel a complete, absolute sense of freedom.